Hello and welcome back to Movie Husbands. Today we'll be reviewing Navalny. Directed by Daniel Roher, Navalny details the 2020 assassination attempt of the Russian opposition leader and former presidential candidate Alexei Navalny, in which he was poisoned with a military-grade nerve agent. So Matt, what did you think of Navalny?
I thought this was a very important documentary. I thought it was very clean. I feel weird starting off with the negative, but if I had to say anything about the movie as a whole, I think it maybe is a little too clean. I think on a full spectrum, this documentary is very aptly timed in terms of what's happening in Russia right now in Ukraine and how the opposition leader Navalny is going back to Russia after the event of him trying to be assassinated by this nerve agent. There are some amazing smoking guns in this film, an amazing scene that breaks down this whole thing, which happens in a phone call because he has a list of people that he believes were involved in this plot. And so he's calling them one by one, almost as like a gag, just to see if he could get anything from them. At which point he talks to somebody that works at the place that created the nerve agent, the scientist who just gives away everything. It's the thing that bridges this entire documentary together. And without it, I'm not sure if this documentary would be as good. But because of this scene, I think it just makes this documentary what it is.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say you might not have a documentary without that scene.
No,
not that the movie's bad or anything, but it's a film that feels like it's trudging along towards that scene. Once you get there, you say, holy expletive. It's an extraordinary scene. It's one of the best scenes of the year. I agree with you that the film is just too clean. Not that I'm saying that it should be a smear piece or anything. It doesn't take a very critical view of Navalny at all. And maybe that's because he is so much better as a political figure than Putin is. They do take some time and explore his right-wing roots. He has campaigned for and been a part of some of these right-wing protesters that are somewhat problematic in Russia and somewhat problematic worldwide. And he says, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, so to speak. That's really the only criticism we get. But I did get a sense that he has a pretty profound egotism that could have been examined and maybe have made a really interesting portrait in this film. But this film doesn't seem to be too interested in that. There are some great scenes of background politics like this side of Veep when you see him make a TikTok. And they're talking about the different ways that he could make a TikTok pointing out his poisoners and his attempted murderers. So there's a lot of good stuff in this film, but I wish it was a little bit more bold in its assertions. It has a couple of great scenes. It's a good watch. It's informative. It's interesting. But there are some other documentaries we saw this year that I think are quite a bit ahead of it.
We had just reviewed All the Beauty and the Bloodshed, and we had this conversation during that review of how the movie is a bit biased. It has a perspective, and it's sticking to that perspective, and it's trying to convince you of something in a certain sense. And I think All the Beauty and the Bloodshed, what's so fantastic about it is that it achieves that with all the heart and the proof and the evidence to back it all up in a way that is something you can very much relate to and understand. I do agree. I wish there was a little bit more in terms of Navalny that we got for a documentary that's titled of the person in which we're learning about. I wish there was a little bit more to learn about him. He does seem a little bit closed off as a political figure. We've all known political figures like that where there's this persona publicly that you see of them. And I wish there was a little bit more bridging of that public persona and that private persona. Mm-hmm. But it always feels as if you're a little closed out. You're a little bit out of the loop.
Okay, so you ready to go to grades?
Yeah, I give Navalny a B-.
Oh.
I think it's a pretty good documentary. I think for all the things that I described, it felt a little bit flat for me, but I do think it's very important. And we didn't talk about this, but there's absolutely hilarious moments where they're showing Putin in these press conferences and he won't even say Navalny's name. He refers to them as the opposition or that other guy.
Yeah, the figure you're talking about.
But other than that, I do think it's a very important documentary. I do recommend seeing it because I think it has a lot to say about politics in Russia. I think there's a lot that's under the surface. Mm-hmm. Journalists die, opposition leaders die, and everybody knows and everybody talks about it, but nothing happens. I think that's the most outrageous thing.
Yeah, I give it a B. I agree with everything you're saying. I think it's very damning towards Putin, and it also shows, I think, how easy it is to connect the dots. Granted, they did use intelligence services, they used private intelligence and private investigators to come up with this information, but it was fairly easy for them to find poisoners and get a confession out of them. It's just really damning towards Putin and towards the government that he's running and the conspiracies that he is happy to be a part of. I just wish the film had a bit more of an edge. For the subject matter that it's talking about, it could feel a little bit more urgent. It could feel a little bit more prescient. It seems kind of like you said, that you're always on the outside. It almost feels like you're in the backseat to everything that's going on. There's something that's just missing here. And I'm talking about that from more a filmmaking perspective than I am a political action perspective.
And that's it for our review of Navalny. Navalny is now streaming on HBO, so if you haven't seen it, go check it out. If you have seen Navalny, let us know in the comments, what did you think about the film? As always, thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time.